My name is Deb Van Dynen. I'm an Associate Professor of English Education at Hope College, and I have the honor of being the NEA Big Read and Little Read Lakeshore Director. The NEA Big Read Lakeshore and Little Read Lakeshore programs are month-long community-wide reading programs focused on the reading of a common book. This year, because of COVID, we've switched to a mostly virtual program. We're excited for the possibilities that this presents us as we can expand our audience's scope and reach, as well as our ability to connect with speakers and experts that are beyond our geographical reach. Thank you for joining us this year as we explore Nathaniel Hawthorne's In the Heart of the Sea and Marcia Diane Arnold's Galapagos Girl Galapagos. We hope you enjoy these events and learn lots about the book's topics and themes, as well as issues and important questions in our world today.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Big Read Program 2020. This is our event titled Why Read Moby Dick, and we are just thrilled that you are here with us tonight. My name is Deb Van Dynen. I'm an Associate Professor of English Education at Hope College, and I have the pleasure of being the Big Read and Little Read Director. You guys, we have a treat tonight. Not only do we get to meet my friend and colleague, Dr. Kathleen Verduin, but we also get to meet one of Hope's shining students, Mitchel Van Acker, who is a fifth-year English major with a creative writing emphasis. One of the reasons we chose Mitch to do this event with us, we asked him, is that Moby Dick is one of Mitch's favorite books, as with Kathleen. And prior to going live tonight, Mitch was describing some of the chapters as gorgeous, and also describing some of the chapters as lengthy and on unusual topics. But I know that this book is a favorite of his. I know it's a favorite of Dr. Verduin's. And I just want to create a space tonight for all of you, maybe who've never read this book, to be encouraged to read it for the first time. And I'll be honest, I'm an English ed professor. Literature is sort of my jam and my thing. And it wasn't until this summer that I read for the first time Moby Dick. Why are we talking about Moby Dick during this 2020 Big Read program? Our chosen book, In the Heart of the Sea by Nathaniel Hawthorne, is the true story that Herman Melville based Moby Dick on. So there's a wonderful connection and an opportunity for us to delve deep into this book that many people have read as a required reading in high school or college, or who have picked up on their own. I have friends who read this book annually every year. Mitch described this book as something he goes back to, just as some of us go back to our favorite musical songs. To go back to favorite chapters and reread them and enjoy them again and again. So with no further ado, thanks again for joining us. If you're watching us live, we're so glad you're here. If you're watching us at a different time and place, maybe you're in your living room or your office or your kitchen, wherever you are, we're so glad you've joined us. And I'll turn it over to Mitch now. Mitch, thanks so much.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to start off by thanking Dr. Van Dynen and Kaylee and all the rest of the people at the Big Read for setting this up. This is going to be a really fun night. It's always a treat to just talk about this book for any length of time. And I'm very happy to be here with Dr. Verduin, who I had the privilege of meeting in my first English class at Hope. She's been a committed and devoted teacher and servant to the minds of students for many years at Hope. Her and I have spent many long conversations talking about various different types and various different books on various different subjects. We've done research together, and I'm very happy to be here, more or less as a swan song, I guess, for me, leaving Hope. So I'm really happy to be here and really honored. And so I'm going to open it up to Dr. Verduin for some opening comments.
Thanks. And I'm very happy to be here with you, Mitch. Mitch is definitely one of our star English majors. So I want to start. Can you hear me? I hear echoes. I want to start by saying something about what Moby Dick has to do with the heart of the sea. Everybody knows the heart of the sea is about the sinking of the Essex in 1820, stove by a whale, as they said in those days, and the subsequent ordeal of the survivors who were adrift in the Pacific for 5 long months. I can't begin to imagine that. And of course, they were forced to resort to cannibalism. That's probably one of the reasons this story is so gripping, because it presents the unthinkable, the unimaginable. And a year after his survival, Owen Chase, the first mate, wrote a book describing the ordeal that he went through, titled Narrative of the Most Extraordinary and Distressing Shipwreck of the Whale Ship Essex of Nantucket. There's the title page. I just by accident, I came across a little essay by one of the descendants of the Essex Cruz survivors. This apparently has become a kind of family tradition for her. And she describes her family's Thanksgiving dinners. My mother clutches the drumstick in her hand, growling like a dog, a spark of menace in her eyes. She gnaws at the bone, maniacally shouting, "The cartilage," over and over. Moments later, my dad reaches a hand slowly over my mother's plate, feigning a look of fear. My mother, fully committed to the shtick, snaps at him, protecting the turkey bone as if she is a famished wolf. This bit always gets big laughs. So as Freud said, we tend to joke about what we're afraid of. Certainly the descent to cannibalism, really animal level, is something that I guess we should be frightened by. But Melville read this narrative when he himself was on a whale ship, the Acushnet, borrowed a copy of the narrative, read it in one day, and his copy survives with annotations in the margins. That's his ship, the Acushnet. And in 1852, the year after he published Moby Dick, he went to Nantucket and supposedly met the captain of the Essex and even saw Owen Chase from a distance. He writes that the narrative, quote, "the reading of this wondrous story upon the landless sea had a surprising effect on me." So that was obviously the beginning. You can compare a few passages in the narrative of Owen Chase with Moby Dick. I have one here. Here's what Owen Chase says about the charge of the whale. "I turned around and saw him, about 100 yards directly ahead of us, coming down apparently with twice his ordinary speed. And it appeared to me at the moment with tenfold fury and vengeance in his aspect. The surf flew in all directions about him, and his course toward us was marked by a white foam, a rod in width, which he made with a continual violent thrashing of his tail." And now here's a passage from Moby Dick. "From the ship's bows, nearly all the seamen now hung inactive, all their enchanted eyes intent upon the whale, which from side to side, strangely vibrating his predestinating head, sent a broad band of overspreading semicircular foam before him as he rushed. Retribution, swift vengeance, eternal malice were in his whole aspect, and the solid white buttress of his forehead smote the ship's starboard bow till men and timbers reeled." And there was one more account, as perhaps you know, that inspired Melville. It was an article in the Knickerbocker magazine in 1839 titled Moby Dick, the White Whale of the Pacific. So like Melville's monster, this whale drags a boat on a terrifying tear through the waves. And like Moby Dick also, he seemed intentionally bent on the destruction of the boats that crossed his path.
Okay, well, so talking about all these historical contexts and how we've connected it with the book, I think one way sort of to get in on this preliminary was is to think about what sort of relevance does Moby Dick continue to have, especially in today's climate, which I mean, I don't need to go into all the various different chaotic sort of events happening and title shifts and everything. So how can we apply Moby Dick to our understanding of the times we're living in now?
Well, I'd have to admit it's not everybody's kind of book. You know, since people started learning that I was going to do this presentation, I can't, there were all these embarrassed confessions. Well, I've actually never read Moby Dick, or I've heard of Moby Dick, but I've never read it, or I tried to read it once and just gave up, or it was assigned to me, but I couldn't get through it. You know, I came across a cartoon a number of years ago that shows a surgery, an operating table, and the nurse says, "Oh no, we're out of anesthetic." And the doctor smiles and said, "Well, here's a copy of Moby Dick. Just read this, and you'll be asleep in no time."
Yeah.
You know, so I admit it's not everybody's taste. You know, you can read it as an adventure story. You probably know there was a movie version with Gregory Peck a number of years ago, which basically, you know, doesn't get into the deeper meanings, just presents it as a great adventure story.
I believe Orson Welles played the minister, didn't he?
Yes, Father Mapple, he did. Yes, it was a great performance. Yeah, but I'm not sure, you know, that the film really attempted to get into some of the philosophical depth of the novel, which I think is really there. And I think perhaps we could start with Captain Ahab. I think you were going to ask me about Ahab.
Yeah, well, this kind of goes into what I sort of think of its modern relevance, because though the sort of the circumstances of everything can't be, you know, in terms of context matched up with a whole lot, I think that Ahab serves as a model of, I think, what I view to be Melville's conception of evil. And I think that, like, Melville, from what I understand from Moby Dick, Melville, it seems to me, construes evil as a kind of holding on too tightly to things. It's similar to actually like William Blake or even Dante, where if you have a sort of longing towards something, but if you pursue it, if you pursue an unknowable and ungraspable thing too radically, then it quickly becomes corrupted.
Yeah.
I mean, whether we're talking about, you know, I mean, everybody, whether you're on, say, for example, the left or the right, you know, both of those positions are held with intent to bring about the best society for whatever your values are. But if those best intentions just sort of get radically, you know, if you follow those intentions radically, and you hold on too tightly, then it tends to become corrupt. And so I was going to say, like, is Ahab evil or a casualty of man's search for meaning? What does Ishmael think, and what do you think Melville thinks?
Okay. Yeah. Ahab is, of course, the main character, so we should confront him first. I think that if you look into the literary DNA, so to speak, of this novel, I mean, every work of literature is in some ways a product of other works of literature that have preceded it or that go alongside it, you know. And of course, in some ways, he's the romantic hero or the Byronic hero, inspired to some extent by Milton's Satan, an obsessive character, full of rage and anger and resistance. I mean, Melville calls Ahab a monomaniac. He's got just one thing on his mind that eats up his humanity. And he's contrasted, of course, with other characters on board the ship. The first mate, Starbuck, who is a good man, a sensible man, and just sees Moby Dick as he says, a dumb brute who didn't really intend to go after Ahab personally. And then the others don't care one way or another. or just, on the ship for what they can make out of it. But Ahab is very different. Definitely a romantic hero. Melville had been reading Shakespeare, kind of discovered Shakespeare on his own. And you can hear that sometimes in the speeches he attributes to Ahab. I'm going to read one from chapter 37. Dry heat upon my brow. Oh, time was when as the sunrise nobly spurred me, so the sunset soothed. No more. This lovely light, it lights not me. All loveliness is anguish to me, since I can there enjoy. I mean, you can hear the rhythm. It's blank verse. It sounds like Shakespeare, But I also think I don't think I don't think that Ahab is evil. No, I think he's hurt. I think he's traumatized. I think he's driven crazy. And I'll just read what Ishmael, the narrator, of course, who is observing this bizarre individual, says. The white whale swam before him as the monomaniac incarnation of all those malicious agencies which some deep men feel eating in them, till they're left living on with half a heart and half a lung, that intangible malignity which has been from the beginning, to whose dominion even the modern Christians ascribe one half the world, in other words, evil, which the ancient Ophites, the snake worshippers of the East, reverenced in their statue devil. Ahab did not fall down and worship it like them, but deliriously transferring its idea to the abhorred white whale, he pitted himself all mutilated against it. So in a sense, the white whale is a sort of incarnation for Ahab about everything that's wrong, unjust, tragic, hellish in the world and in human experience. And then to go on, all that most maddens and torments, all that stirs up the lees, all truth with malice in it, all that cracks the sinews and cakes the brain, all the subtle demoniums of life and thought, all evil to crazy Ahab, were visibly personified and made practically assailable in Moby Dick. He piled upon the whale's white hump the sum of all the general rage and hate felt by his whole race from Adam down, and then, as if his chest had been a mortar, he burst his hot heart's shell upon it. So, you could say he's angry because the white whale took off his leg, dismasted him, as he puts it. But the white whale has also become a kind of metaphysical, philosophical, you might even say religious incarnation of the principles of evil that are, of course, still so manifest in the world. So you could say, in a way, Moby Dick pulls Ahab down with him, as of course he does. Ahab does not survive. He doesn't make the world a better place. He's contrasted with another captain, who is interviewed in the course of the novel, who also lost a leg to a whale, but laughs it off, approaches it from a more, I suppose, sane and rationalistic perspective. But Ahab is a tragic character in that he sees, he feels deeply everything that's wrong and unjust. So, yeah, I can see how might be relevant to some of the conflicts, the agonies of racism, and other problems of our times that are, of course, so dramatic today with this still unfinished election.
Well, that quotation reminded me of the theologian Thomas Morton.
Okay.
He he had an essay on where he basically enumerated what he thought the devil's strategy was for turning people towards evil, and he claims that the devil's sort of go-to move is to try to get people obsessed with evil. Like people get so sort of reviled by sort of the fabric of existence itself that they turn against existence, and it's like in the forms of like typical sins, but then the ultimate consequence of that is eventually sort of like turning against God. And I think that it's interesting that it's a great point that you bring up that Ahab is compared with the other captain who also almost, I mean, if you view it metaphorically, the other captain who lost a leg and laughs it off.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's showing two very sort of contrasting approaches to what could justifiably be the cruelty of existence. Because in this passage, you get the sense that, like, this, like, in some sense, to be human is to be injured in a very deep spiritual way.
Okay.
And there's kind of two approaches to that.
Yeah.
You can sort of have that sort of light touch of the one captain, or you can sort of let yourself slip into Ahab's mode, where you sort of pursue this untangible hurt that you've received to destruction, and to the destruction of many people around you too.
And that's what happens with Ahab. In a sense, he becomes the thing he hates. You know, his deliberate pursuit of Moby Dick kills everybody on the ship except, of course, Ishmael. You know, he becomes himself a mighty force of destruction, and he takes on almost, the kind of glorified, exaggerated strength and power and force, of the whale. And of course, he's contrasted too, near the beginning of the novel, with Father Mapple. Father Mapple, they're kind of bookends in a way. Father Mapple, too, is a mighty pageant creature, a man who lives with God, a man who sees all that's wrong with the universe, and yet, submits to the power of God, doesn't take it on himself to challenge God or to be heretical, or to blaspheme, the way Melville does. Ahab. Ahab does, says, "I'll strike the sun if it insulted me." So, but Mapple, is the one who realizes that God is all powerful. He doesn't seek to understand God. He doesn't have a cozy relationship with God, but he understands that he cannot fathom the judgments of God. He cannot make sense of the universe. He just has to rest in faith. And so he finally says, and these are great words too, in his sermon, delight is to him a far, far upward and inward delight, who against the proud gods and commodores of this earth ever stands forth his own inexorable self. And eternal delight and deliciousness will be his, who coming to lay him down can say with his final breath, "O Father, chiefly known to me by thy rod, mortal or immortal, here I die. I have striven to be thine, more than to be this world's or mine own. Yet this is nothing. I leave eternity to thee. For what is man that he should live out the lifetime of his God?" Well, that's the perspective of faith. It's not a sappy, shallow faith. This little God will take care of me. No, it's a faith that realizes that there are great mysteries, great injustices, terrifying things about human life, but accepts it, submits to the will of God. So that's, as I said, kind of a contrast with Ahab.
Yeah, in the past, you've written about Moby Dick. What are the characters? Where the Calvinist context you see?
Oh, yeah, I did. I did. Yes, I did. I would say that there's a lot of Calvinism in this novel. Melville, of course, was brought up in the Dutch Reformed Church and heard a lot about Calvinism. There's a picture of Calvin himself. And then we have these 5 points of Calvinism. And some of us still remember total depravity, the evil of human nature, unconditional election, that only God selects some souls for salvation and some for damnation, that the atonement of Christ is limited only to those souls who are predestined. They cannot resist the grace of God, and they will persevere. Well, these are hard doctrines for a lot of people, but it has a rather grand and mighty and majestic concept of God. God, not somebody that you can manipulate, with nice prayers or anything like that. It's full of mystery. It's full of things that seem contradictory, that are so dark and strange, that they almost kind of flow into the whole idea of evil. Peter de Vries, the Dutch Reformed novelist, in one of his books, speaks about, the Dutch heritage, and he says the God that they worshipped was little different from the devil that they feared. Here's the church in New York City where Melville was baptized. And then if we could see the next picture. And here's the First Church of Albany, where he attended as a young man after his father died. And he became more absorbed in the family of his mother, the Dutch side of the family. So he was certainly exposed to Calvinism. I think one thing is the way that this novel just breathes the Bible. In almost every chapter, there's a biblical allusion. I actually discovered one. I have to reveal it to the world sometime. But one of the captains that Ishmael meets is Captain Peleg, and he's the one who decides what portion, of the gain will go to each sailor. He sort of distributes it, And I happened to notice once that there is a Peleg in the Old Testament, and his name means division. So, of course, it's kind of an in-joke, the kind you can make only, when you know the Bible so well that you can make these little offhand jokes about it. But, of course, there's this great passage in the book of Job about the whale, Leviathan. Canst thou draw out Leviathan with a hook, or his tongue with a cord that thou lettest down? Canst thou put a hook in his nose, or bore his jaw through a thorn? None is so fierce that dare stir him up, who then is able to stand before me? So in the book of Job, which Melville undoubtedly knew, the whale is the greatest beast on the earth, is comparable, to the mystery and the wonder of the Almighty. So I think that certainly comes into it. And so, of course, so many names are biblical. Ahab, the king who stood against God in the Old Testament. Elijah, the prophet. Ishmael, the outcast, the wanderer. All right. And then the very last line about the ship that picks up Ishmael, the Rachel weeping for her children, trying to salvage her family. So yeah, I think that's something that was kind of in Melville, definitely. And he also speaks about Calvinism when he talks about Hawthorne. Probably have our slides all out of place now, but never mind. We'll just deal. Melville read a review of one book of Nathaniel Hawthorne before they actually met. And he says, there is that Calvinist sense of, I have lost my place here, but never mind. Calvinist sense of, of mystery. He attributes it to the Calvinist tradition, where God is not friendly, exactly, or cozy, as I said, but mysterious and far above us. And that Calvinist sense of evil and depravity that he saw in Hawthorne, that was an extremely interesting and important friendship for Melville. Melville moved to Western Massachusetts in 1850, and there he was for a short time a neighbor of Hawthorne. They became friends. Hawthorne praised Moby Dick, one of the few who understood it, and Melville was tremendously grateful, and moved. One critic says Hawthorne was perhaps the one person that Melville could talk to on the metaphysical level of doubt and faith, that Melville was so embroiled in. A few years later, Hawthorne went to England as a consul in Liverpool, and Melville visited him, and they went out to the beach and sat there in the sand and smoked cigars together. And Hawthorne writes, Melville, as he always does, began to reason of providence and futurity, of everything that lies beyond human ken, and informed me he had pretty much made up his mind to be annihilated, meaning he didn't think he'd live after death. But he still does not seem to rest in the anticipation, and I think will never rest until he gets hold of a definite belief. It's strange how he persists and has persisted ever since I knew him, probably long before, in wandering to or fro over these deserts, as dismal and monotonous as the sand hills amid which we were sitting. He can neither believe nor be comfortable in his unbelief, and he is too honest and courageous not to try to do one or the other. If he were a religious man, he would be one of the most truly religious and reverential. He has a very high and noble nature and is better worth immortality than most of us. So I think, that's really a wonderful comment and a story of a great literary friendship that was mutually inspiring, of course, which comes along very rarely.
So thinking about that friendship, actually, I was going to ask, in a letter to Nathaniel Hawthorne, Melville famously called Moby Dick a wicked book. And given the fact that, despite there being lots of, probably the biggest part of its DNA is perhaps the King James Bible, despite being so littered with like religious overtones. What do you think Melville himself meant by saying it was a wicked book?
Mm-hmm.
Especially to his friend Hawthorne.
Yeah. Well, I can't read his mind, of course. And Melville was kind of a joker at times. There are a lot of jokes in Moby Dick. Some innuendos about sex that a lot of people don't notice. Or maybe they do notice. Maybe it was just me that I took a long time to notice them. But what did he mean? Well, I think it was because Ahab is a blasphemer. He says, I'd strike the sun if it insulted me. And he associates the sun with God. That Melville, the protagonist, you might say, of the novel, is somebody who, in a sense, curses God. Because he curses the universe and the way things are. He sees the injustice. He sees the baffling mysteries amid which, pardon me, there was a pun on your name, I guess, amid which we live. So maybe that was it. I don't know. I wish I knew, but then he finished by saying, I feel as spotless as a lamb, So could I talk about Melville a little bit more? Of course I can. Right?
Yeah, that's what we're here for.
Okay. Well, yeah, he's somebody, I wish I could have met, but I would have felt very awed, I think, by his presence. But, I see Melville as a young man who was born into privilege. Both his grandfathers were Revolutionary War heroes, not just soldiers, but heroes. His father's family, the Dutch side, they were highly respected in New York State, the Gansworts, well-known family, very influential, powerful, and so forth. His father came from a Scottish family. All right. So, that's his father there, Alan Melville. But something happened. Okay. Alan Melville spent a lot of time in Europe. He was kind of a draper. He bought fabric. He bought cloth, and brought it back to sell. But he became very sick when Melville was really still a teenager. And he died raving, as they say. He was delirious, and wild. But then there were stories. There was a kind of undercurrent of gossip about him, that perhaps he had fathered an illegitimate daughter. So here is this kind of nice, admirable, privileged family. And yet there's this insidious undercurrent of scandal, which I think, will probably ate at Melville and made him suspicious of smiling bourgeois optimism and respectability. Right after he published Moby Dick, he published, very rapidly a very strange novel called Pierre. Pierre is the main character. Pierre grows up in a situation that is all too much like Melville's own. He's got a beloved mother named Maria, and that's his wife, actually, but we'll get to her. Maria is the lady in the black dress. Maria, the mother in the novel, is called Mary. Well, coincidence? Or are they? Yeah, that's Melville's mother. He is fatherless. His father is dead. He is happily engaged. Now let's have a picture of his wife, if you can find that. Lizzie, or Elizabeth Shaw. No, yeah, there she is. There she is. Yeah, and she too came from a very admired family. Her father was, I think, Chief Justice of Massachusetts or something. Her name was Elizabeth, but she was called Lizzie. Now, in this novel, Pierre's fiancée is called Lucy. So Mary, Maria, Lizzie, Lucy. Is this just coincidence? I don't know. But they represent a kind of willful blindness, a kind of ingrained sentimentality that refuses to see the complexity of human life and the prevalence of evil. And so Pierre kind of goes crazy too, it also comes through rumors about his dead father, So I see Melville, as a young man who starts out very well, goes to good schools, is bright, is privileged, there's a lot of money. Then his father starts spending, and goes bankrupt, and then finally dies, and there are all these rumors. All right, what does this do, to a young person who has been brought up in a fairly sheltered environment? And then, of course, because there's no money anymore in the family, he decides to make some money by going to sea. Oh, that's romantic, right? To be a sailor? Or is it? Some of those voyages lasted years. Can you imagine being cooped up on a ship with a group of men, some of whom are probably very hardened individuals? I mean, we know there was a lot of, shall we say, sex on board ship. How did that strike Melville? It must have been an eye-opener for him as to the complexity of the universe. And he shows, this kind of veiled irritation at the shallowness of a lot of nice people, according to what's going on. And this prompts him to ask these big philosophical questions. Is there a God? If God is there, is God good? Does God love us? Do the evil things that happen, the suffering in the world, does it make sense? Is it the will of God? Is it punished, or is it just random? So I think, his religious background primed him to look at the world in a very cosmic, metaphysical way, and to take his personal experience and observations and permit them to make him ask these big and troubling questions about the fundamental nature of the universe and of humanity and of humanity's relationship to God. So I think, there was a lifetime kind of metaphysical quest in Melville. And then, of course, after Moby Dick, he continued to write, but his books were failures. In fact, when he published Pierre, there was a headline in one of the newspapers saying, Herman Melville crazy. And he's continued to write, but never got anywhere. And there are also stories that have surfaced about erratic behavior in his later decades. In fact, domestic violence, particularly toward his wife. Now, we don't know a lot of details, but apparently there was at one point a plot that his wife's brother tried to kind of steal her away and take her to New York. And, but she, in the manner of those days, she said, no, my responsibility is just to endure. Now, we don't know, the details. We don't know why he was provoked, but at least you get a sense of a man of tremendous talent and intelligence whose life is going nowhere. He ends up as an outdoor customs officer in New York at one of the piers. And one, really moving thing is that he was still writing, and he was working on his final novel, Billy Budd. It was unfinished when he died of a heart attack, I guess, or of heart disease. It was kept by the family, fortunately, but I mean, in a bread box. Can you get this? A bread box was inherited. And so when there's a Melville revival in the 1920s, one of his first biographers connects with his granddaughter, Eleanor Metcalf. And she says, well, here's this manuscript that my grandfather left. We're keeping it in the bread box. And it's a beautiful novel. It is essentially finished, about a young man, Billy Budd, golden-haired, innocent, who really, represents in some ways Christ. But like Christ, he is unjustly crucified. Melville was reading at that time The Life of Saint Elizabeth. Again, a very medieval idea of Christian innocence and charity. And perhaps, we might say that's where he finally came to rest, with an idea like that. But, if I think about Melville, as I guess I would imagine him, I get a tremendous sense of tension and anxiety and rage. So in some ways he is Ahab, but he's also Ishmael.
So I was going to ask you, what sort of corollaries do you see to the character of Ishmael? Ishmael always does fascinate me, and I thought it was interesting that earlier in our talk you said that Ahab was the main character.
All right.
And in many ways he kind of is. And I think it's interesting that you say that too, because Ishmael kind of starts off as your protagonist. And starts off as your narrator. But really, like, there are whole chapters where he just sort of vanishes into the fabric of the world. Where he's saying things that he really can't possibly know, and back and forth. And yet, so he has this sort of, this wandering quality. And I mean, he has insofar as we know, a very, we don't know much about Ishmael, but we get the sense that he is similar to the wayfaring Melville after his sort of abandoned his family.
Yeah, thanks for getting me back on track. Sure. Again, if you look at sort of the DNA of the novel, as I sometimes like to say, the novel starts out as what was called a picaresque novel, sort of invented in the 18th century by Henry Fielding and other writers of that time, Tom Jones, where the story is about a kind of happy-go-lucky, unattached young man who wanders through the world having adventures. And it's basically kind of funny, There's something of that. You could say that type of novel, in a way, also owes something of its ancestry to Don Quixote, who sallies forth through the world in the company of his squire, Sancho. And so, in American literature, we often get kind of rootless heroes who go through the world, accompanied often by somebody of a different race or a different class. So we have Ishmael and Queequeg at the beginning. The Indian, the South Sea Islander, it's like the Lone Ranger and Tonto. It's a very durable tradition. So it kind of starts out that way. And again, he's very happy-go-lucky and jokey, and the things that we see at the beginning of the novel. He goes to New Bedford. He goes to the Seaman's Chapel. He stays at an inn and has clam chowder, and so forth. That's all kind of good fun. But okay, then his life changes. He enters the darker world, the realm of imagination, of fantasy, maybe a descended to hell on board the ship, the Pequod. And it opens him up. He changes. He's not just your good fellow that you'd like to go on a trip with. He is somebody who is suddenly being confronted with some of the mysteries of existence, and he starts talking in a different way. And you could say this is an imperfection of the novel. I mean, as you say, we don't know anything about Ishmael. He just says, call me Ishmael. He doesn't even say that's his name. But Ishmael is the outcast, the reject, the unwanted son. So there's something, I guess, in his background. But, he starts to sound more like Ahab. I have this quotation where he says, this is what the whale meant to Ahab, so it remains to see what it meant to me. And he says, when we consider the other theory of the natural philosophers, that all other earthly hues, other than white, every stately or lovely emblazoning, the sweet tinges of sunset skies and woods, the gilded velvets of butterflies, the butterfly cheeks of young girls, all these are but subtle deceits, not actually inherited substances, but only laid on from without, so that all deified nature absolutely paints like the harlot, whose allurements cover nothing but the charnel house within. He's got this great chapter, on the whiteness of the whale, where he acknowledges whiteness is usually seen as a sign of innocence, but it can also be the color of the corpse, of decay, of killing snow, so whiteness is a terrible thing. So he's obviously changed, I did, just because I brought it along, I'm going to pick up this book here, because I thought of this as I was trying to prepare. This book belonged to my parents, so that's one reason why I want to keep it. And it's called We Thought We Heard the Angels Sing. I guess you can see that. 1943, I think, was the date. And it is a true story about, Captain Eddie Rickenbacker, who was a great flying ace of World War II. And he and his crew also were cast into the Pacific and were in a lifeboat for a number of weeks and were rescued. So, it ends happily. No cannibalism, fortunately. I always want to say pass the ketchup or something, but sorry. But I mean, this book, here, I'll put it up here. It was written by one of the survivors, Captain James C. Whitaker. And I think my parents got it probably because Whitaker then made the rounds of churches. Because what he writes about in this book is how this ordeal, as he said, made him find God. So, something has happened. There's a moral to it. There's a discovery. The homecoming brings the great boon. If you go back to the idea of the archetypal wanderer and journeyer, something is gained, and what's gained is faith. By being saved, he says, I found my God again. 3 months at sea in a lifeboat is the greatest adventure any man can have, that in which he finds his God. Now, can we say that Ishmael has found his God?
I would say no. And the one thing that I think that's interesting about you bringing up that in particular is did I kind of freeze? All right, I'm back. I think one thing that's interesting what you were saying about the going out onto sea and how you often had these very hardened people. You also had these very subversive actions for that time period. The sea was almost this kind of, quite literally fluid place of this infinite expanse. Yeah. And then you have this sort of place out of the reach of law, and being out of the reach of law, also out of the reach of normal religious traditions, normal understandings of the world. And it almost seems to me that Moby Dick, the entire book of Moby Dick is people interpreting the brutalities of the sea, the brutalities of the sea, which representing this sort of fluid, infinite, and punishing universe in different ways. Of course, you have Starbuck, who is kind of coming to the conclusion of the novel that you just put up. You have Melville, or you have Ahab, who's having this very destructive reaction to it. And I almost think, and I'd like to know what you think about this, but I almost think that Ishmael comes to a kind of polytheism almost. He wants to
What kind of what?
Polytheism.
Oh, all right, okay.
Because, and I think he sees in his, almost like you were saying, his teacher or his companion, Queequeg, is, he sees this, like, sort of, in some sense, the meaning of Queequeg's culture written on his skin. I mean, he has tattoos. He decorates his coffin. That's the most sublime metaphor of all, like when the coffin finally comes up after the Pequod has sunk. And you see, like, sort of the inscriptions of that culture. And he, Ishmael takes part in Queequeg's religious ceremonies too, and he repeatedly tells them how he tries to hold all of these sort of holy attempts at contacting or engaging with the numinous. And it seems to me that Ishmael values flexibility in his spirituality, and being able to, having his soul to sort of like being able to like plunge to the deepest of feelings and to the like most highest of feelings in all different facets. Because I think in many, I interpret this book as almost a critique of orthodoxy. It's not, he's not like specifically attacking Christianity. He's not specifically attacking any religion, but it seems to me that he's attacking the idea of a sort of fanatical orthodoxy. If you become too rigid in your approach to the universe, chances are you'll become sort of corrupted by it, like Ahab. So I was wondering what you thought of that.
Yeah, I think that sounds convincing. When Ishmael first, meets up with Queequeg, and he finds that they're going to share a room at the inn, he sees Queequeg, of course, bowing down to his little black idol, Yojo. And he says, well, we are told to do unto others as we'd like them to do unto us. So what would I want? I would want Queequeg to convert to my Presbyterian religion. But, why should I not also accommodate his religion? So, yeah, that's certainly there. Right. Yeah. And you're right. I mean, so many, I suppose, pious or orthodox statements do fall apart. Water has always been a symbol of change, a symbol of the unconscious, a symbol of a dream. In a way, this voyage of the Pequod for Ishmael is an entry into a dream world, a world of.
I think you just froze there.
What? Okay. But okay, I'm just going to dash forward. But that doesn't mean, that Ishmael is completely free of all those things. I mean, I like what the poet W.H. Auden says about the end of the novel. Ishmael is thrust back into life as an orphan with his first choice still to make. Is picked up by this ship that is called the Rachel as the sorrowing mother, So it is kind of like a rebirth from the waters, so to speak, So, yeah, we don't know what's in store for Ishmael afterwards.
Yeah.
And it's probably Melville didn't. But one theme that also comes up in some of his later work, like his great short story, Bartleby the Scrivener, but also Pierre, this kind of wild novel I was talking about, is the mystery of ambiguity, okay? Which is right? In Bartleby is this strange kind of outcast character who is confined to an office that is kind of stuck between two buildings on Wall Street. And so from one window, he looks out at the wall of the building next to him, and it's kind of white. it's discolored, but it's basically white. It's a skylight, I think. On the other side, there's another wall shoved up, which is black. So there he is, standing between black and white, and it couldn't be more obvious. And he goes into a kind of trance, and keeps gazing at these. It's almost like, a philosophical quandary. What is right and what is wrong? What is good and what is evil? What is white and what is black? And as I said, the novel Pierre is subtitled The Ambiguities. So I think here is somebody who is willing to face the contradiction, who is willing to set aside the orthodoxy of his childhood. And yet, at the same time, at the end of his life, he writes about a young man who is modeled on Christ and whose last words are words of forgiveness. So that seems to be, the image of Christ, not theology, not orthodoxy, not doctrine, but, the kind of shining eternal image of the innocence and compassion and love of Christ. So, as I said, that's sort of where he is, I think, at the end of his life. But he was certainly somebody who was willing to be considered an atheist or an agnostic, who was willing to ask, the shockingly direct questions, and who wasn't totally satisfied with what he had grown up with, which is maybe why he says it was a wicked book. I don't know. But.
Well, one question I also wanted to ask, and then maybe this goes back to my earlier question about Moby Dick's relevance. Is I love Percy Bysshe Shelley's quote in the very end of Defense of Poetry, where he says that poets are hierophants of an unapprehended inspiration, the mere gigantic shadows which futurity casts upon the present. Are there any ways in retrospect which you think Moby Dick was prophetic, and of what?
Do you have something in mind? I'm stalling, but what do you think?
Well, I think there's a lot of, I think it's very fascinating. One thing that I was just thinking about in the back of my mind recently was there's a thing in English that we call the pathetic fallacy, which is kind of a no-go for modern writers right now, because it seems very sort of self-aggrandizing as humans, because it's like, why would nature, and the pathetic fallacy is basically a writer will describe a storm or a bunch of unnatural things happening in nature when a king dies, like in Macbeth. After Duncan is killed, the horses go crazy and the owls screech. And people sort of shy, like they look down upon. They look how anthropocentric they were. But it's almost even now. And one thing we haven't talked about is sort of the ecological elements of what this is about. But it's almost as if our power of human, or our technology of humans, have extended so comprehensively across the world that the pathetic fallacy is kind of true. Our moral failings as people, because our technology is so ubiquitous now, is actually manifesting itself in real world disasters. And so, and I think that a lot of that can be tied to these sorts of problems, that moral problems that Ahab is illustrating, where you have this sort of tormented quest for more and more and more of, mining and plumbing the earth of its natural resources, and then irresponsibly using it, and sort of bringing about natural chaos in the natural world. So it's almost so. I think one way in which it was prophetic, in which it was prophetic, was the sort of tie of this sort of deep spiritual problem in the human, extending to a sort of hatred of the natural world, like a very deep resentment of the natural world. That's just one thing that I had, and that so.
Yeah, I think you could certainly say, the whole whaling industry, you talk about the so-called cetological chapters, where Melville goes in great detail, some people just skip them, about how the practice of whaling, the profession of whaling, if you want to call it that, was carried out, It's not just in the abstract, it's actual tools and instruments and methods, and so forth. And we know that huge numbers of whales were killed, wantonly for the sake of the whale oil. I guess saved by the electric light eventually. But yeah, certainly there's this kind of resistance, to the world, to the natural world, which perhaps should just be looked at in wonder. But, if you want to see it in terms of our own times, too, I guess you could ask about the one black character in the story, Pip, the little cabin boy, who loses his mind. He's cast overboard, and he bobs around in the ocean for a while, and everybody says, oh, he's going to be fine. And then they pick him up, and he is fine, but he's gone crazy. But his madness is divine as sense, as Emily Dickinson would have said, because now he sees through the mask, so to speak, of the physical world. He sees through to the spiritual world. But there's this great scene in the chapter called the doubloon, that Ahab takes a gold coin, a Spanish doubloon, and he nails it to the mast, and he says, "This goes to the first person who sees Moby Dick." And so they all walk by, and Melville has them all parade by, and we get into their heads, and we hear what they're thinking, about it. And then here comes little Pip, who is crazy, and he just starts murmuring, I look, you look, he looks, we look, ye look, they look. And they say, oh, poor kid, he's crazy, and one says, oh, he's reciting, he's conjugating, or he's reciting the grammar. But it's also a theme, that there are different perspectives on everything, on nature, on God, on human life, on all those things. And that's, this sort of terror of the ambiguity. If we could just settle on one or the other and say, okay, this is the truth. I'm going to operate with this. But instead, every time we think we have a truth, it sort of melts away. At least I think in Melville's view.
Well, and it's interesting because I've often considered Melville's perspective, and actually that chapter specifically. I've always thought, I believe Nietzsche began writing a little bit after. I don't think that they were exactly contemporaneous, but I almost feel like Nietzsche comes to a similar conclusion with perspectivism, where you have this sort of like infinite regress of possible truth, and that if you need to sort of figure out a way of being flexible to navigate them, and you can't sort of like, and again I think that concept of orthodoxy, sort of putting a flag in the official approved stamp on reality, and I think that's kind of what Pip's sort of divine madness is saying, is like, I look, you look. Yeah. He's conceiving the world as people looking, in different perspectives.
Yeah. All right. Yeah.
And it's sort of like things looking at each other, kind of. And there's such that beautiful passage of that is one of my favorite chapters. Do you have a favorite chapter?
Yeah, let me just respond to what you said.
Okay, yeah.
It's hard to pick one, but I mean, one thing that's come up in recent decades in the study of African American literature, or the study of American literature, is the frequency with which the Black character becomes sacrificial. Uncle Tom. Of course, I teach Stephen King in my freshman course. There's a lot of that in him. John Coffey in The Green Mile, of course, is electrocuted, and he's unjustly punished for something he didn't do. And then there's the character of Halloran, the Black cook in The Shining, who becomes the hero, risks his own life to save the lives of this white family that he barely knows. And you could go back to Jim in Huckleberry Finn. Sort of a lot of that, a kind of alliance, between the rejected race and the rejected Christ, and yet their sufferings are somehow construed as redemptive, but redemptive for whom? Okay, now I lost my train of thought here. Just a second. Okay, yeah, perspective. Oh, yes. But yeah, I can see that. I mean, you could almost say that, in a sense, Ahab kind of resembles the Übermensch of Nietzsche, I suppose. But Nietzsche never has that tenderness that still goes into Melville. As I said, he's got Billy Budd in his last work, this innocent, beautiful, golden-haired young man whom everybody loves, and yet fate turns against him. But there's a sorrow, there. So if I have a favorite chapter, no, I love the whole thing. But there's one, at the end called The Symphony. And it's an interval where Ahab kind of goes all soft. And it's a beautiful day, and the air is soft, and the ocean is quiet, and he's gazing out, and the breezes are fanning him, and he thinks back to his wife. He has a wife. We don't know much about her. He says there was one dent on her marriage pillow before I left, but he thinks tenderly about her, and he says, he feels regret. Fool, old fool has old Ahab been. Why this strife of the chase? Why weary and palsy the arm and the oar and the iron and the lance? How the richer or better is Ahab now? Behold, oh, Starbuck, is it not hard that with this weary load I bear, one poor leg should have been snatched out from under me? Here, brush this old hair aside. It blinds me that I seem to weep. In other words, stroke my hair away from my forehead. That tender gesture on the part of Starbuck, who is very sympathetic. Okay, I feel as though I were Adam, staggering beneath the piled centuries since paradise. God, crack my heart, stave my brain, mockery, bitter, biting mockery of gray hairs. Have I lived enough joy to wear ye, and seem and feel thus intolerably old? Stand close to me, Starbuck. Let me look into a human eye. It is better than to gaze into sea or sky, better than to gaze upon God. So, that's a moment where even Ahab is capable of human feeling, fellow feeling, sympathy. And of course, Starbuck wants to comfort him. But, you feel it's too late, because at that moment, the evil Persian Indian, Fidela, silently steals onto the deck and just stands there. And he too is a, kind of devil. And Starbuck just walks away, blanched to a corpse's hue with despair. He just says it's too late.
Yes, and I mean, that's a beautiful passage, and it is now a bit past 7, and I think it's a bit of
right.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I know that we could probably go on for. Well, we could go on indefinitely.
We could,
So
just so many personal associations. My Professor Jim Prinz, who loved Moby Dick, also just do a little homage to him.
Absolutely. So, am I responsible for clicking out everything? We are good.
Thanks, everyone.
Good. Thank you.
Give the novel another chance.